need to plan to spend this year's funding, and asking for a commitment that you let us know, because you have terminated programs, you have fired staff. What are you going to do with that money that was already appropriated?
Well, again, we're waiting for OMB guidance, and obviously they'll reach out and work with Congress on these funds. that have not been
OMB is
spent.
not working with Congress. The president is not working with Congress. You are not working with the Congress. We need to understand, if we are going to appropriate dollars, what it is that has happened. What is it that you propose to do with the billions of dollars that you have expropriated?
Yeah, again, that's a function, as you know, that's OMB has those decisions to make, and they'll have to work with you on it.
Then I guess you don't have much control over your agency, Mr.
Well,
Secretary.
ultimately, well, we have a lot of control.
Reporting, you have terminated more than 90% of USAID programs, 60% of programs at state. All are the firing of all our development experts in the next few weeks, and are preparing to fire hundreds more at the State Department. We need an accountability. And if we can't, I don't know, if we can't get it from the secretary, then from whom are we going to get this accountability? It is your department.
Well, with all due respect, some of your numbers are incorrect. We have not cut 60% of the funding at the State Department. If you're referring to the budget request, that's different. There has not been mass layoffs at the State Department. I think there's been less than 200 people that have been ripped from the State Department. From the State Department.
I'm talking about, well, USAID. And
oh, well, that's a different one.
Well,
right.
No, it's not a different issue. You now plan to take on, and the gentleman said you're going to scatter the remnants of
That's
USAID throughout the State Department. Who is going to make sure appropriated funds are spent properly?
Well, they're not going to be scattered. They're actually going to be consolidated in a couple of funds that deliver, for example, International Humanitarian Assistance Fund. We'll also have an increase to the Emergency Refugee and Migration Assistance Fund.
You mentioned previous secretaries who have moved in this direction, and I just want to say to you that they decided not to do it because it was ill-advised. 15% of the planned cuts, there's 15% planned cuts of state staff. Now, who is going to make sure that appropriated funds are spent properly if you have fired all the staff with experience overseeing the process? Will you personally be approving every expenditure? I know you have a lot of jobs already.
No, we're not. First of all, we haven't fired any experienced staff other than the people that were out of the two divisions in the department. But other than that, I said at the State Department, there's been only under 200 people have been removed. Some have retired and so forth, but that's normal in any cycle. We are also going to hire new people, including, as I've already.
You have. Well, my time is short, Mr. Secretary.
Well, so is mine, and that's why I want to tell you that
my time is short here. My time is short. I reclaim my time. You have terminated key monitoring and evaluation programs. Allow us to account for the use of this funding. How does allowing the money to flow out the door while hamstringing your own ability to track that money make our government more efficient and prevent waste, fraud, and abuse? It's clear that from the administration and Musk that the process is ignorant of the purpose of foreign aid, utterly unprepared to manage their own dictates, taking a chainsaw to foreign aid with no concern for human lives or the broader consequences for our security, no plan for the future. I yield back.
Thank you. Before I recognize the Vice Chairman of the Subcommittee, I just want to remind members that let's please, obviously these conversations are helpful, but if we can allow the Secretary to answer, I think that would also be helpful. Vice Chairman, Mr. Edwards, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, thanks for being with us. Thanks for taking on the task that you have. Contrary to the comments you heard immediately before Mr. Desbelart called on me, I applaud the work that you're doing. I firmly believe that you're doing the job that the American people asked of President Trump. And I'd like to associate myself with the comments from Chairman Desbelart. Although I'm not part of the Florida Mafia, I have a great deal of confidence in the job that you're doing, and I applaud the work that you're doing. It takes a great deal of courage to make bold decisions like you have, like President Trump has, in looking at funding that many of us for years have questioned. The American people have questioned the money that goes out of Washington into foreign countries. I applaud the fact that you reminded us that the United States is a humanitarian nation, that we're going to perform our duties to humanity. that we are committed to help development in other countries, and that you're going to demand that in return the United States get a return, that we're building relationships and allies. I look at what you're doing as what most fiscal responsible folks in government would want us to do. It's a form of zero-based budgeting. There are so many programs. I've gone through the list of programs. There's so many. None of us on this panel can read or understand. I believe that it was the right decision to hit the pause button and wring out some of the things that most of us on this panel would agree that don't need to be there, and then begin to rebuild. I think it's the right thing to do, even though it takes quite a bit of courage. And I also thank you for your openness to restart those programs. The thing that is not being talked about up here is the State Department, as you're learning of the programs, as you're hearing from the embassies, are restarting programs every single day because you recognize our role in the world. I'm going to ask one simple question, but I need to use another moment just to reiterate my observation in Ukraine. I had an opportunity a year or so ago to spend several days in Ukraine. There's no question that Putin is the aggressor. He has committed atrocities beyond the comprehension of most average Americans. I realize the difficulty that it is when you've got two very egotistical leaders, world leaders, that we do. And I thought you eloquently pointed out the difficulty in getting those folks together to stop the killing. I would urge you and the president to continue applying the sanctions that we have available to us. With all that pontification, now I'll just ask a simple question. While I was in Europe, I realized that Radio Free Europe is an organization which has traditionally gotten funds from this subcommittee through U.S. Agency for Global Media to educate the folks as to really what's going on out there and to fight the propaganda war, which most of us just do not realize that's taking place. I had a chance to witness that. What are your thoughts about continuing to fund organizations like Radio Free Europe?
Well, I think a couple of things. First of all, they're not in the State Department. We don't operate those. They're operated independently. I know that they're going through their own process that the administration is reviewing. So I don't want to speak about their reform efforts or what their plans may be, because I'm just not a portfolio that I'm working on. I'm working on a lot of other things, but that's just not underneath the State Department. There are some that have suggested that global engagement or global media be brought under the auspices of the State Department. That is not a concrete proposal. I've seen that bandied about by some. If that's a decision that's made, then we'll look forward to creating programs that are effective at delivering news, and most importantly, access to unfettered and free information, given changes in the way people consume information in the world today. But that's not something I'm involved in right now, because that's outside the umbrella of the State Department. It is under the umbrella of your committee, however.
Thank you.
Thank you to the Vice Chairman. Privileged to recognize Ms. Meng now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today. First, I wanted to continue to urge you and the President to do everything in your power to bring home the 58 hostages who Hamas still holds in captivity. That includes 4 American citizens, Itai Khan, Gadi Hagai, Judith Weinstein Hagai, and Omer Nutra. And I want to urge you to continue efforts to please get humanitarian aid into Gaza and make sure it's getting to Palestinian civilians and not Hamas. Mr. Secretary, I too am extremely concerned that your actions will prevent the State Department from fulfilling requirements under federal law to comply with congressional directives and fund programs that Congress agrees, bipartisan agreement, are a priority. One example is basic education, authorized by the Reinforcing Education Accountability and Development, or READ Act. This is a bill that you personally introduced in 2017, and I was proud to co-lead its reauthorization last year in the House. However, during your review of foreign aid, you personally canceled all international basic education programs. As a result, an estimated 44 million learners will lose access to education, vocational, and workforce development programs supported by the U.S. government. These are programs that make us safer, stronger, and more prosperous by building stability and helping kids stay in school. This is statutory. Under federal law, you are required to spend these funds. What is your plan to fulfill the congressional directives of the READ Act and ensure millions of children around the world can stay in school?
Well, number one, we always looked at, I would characterize that as development assistance, because that's what it is. You're trying to build the development capabilities of a country. And I think those would have to be driven, we would be open to doing programs that work, but they would have to be driven because an embassy or a regional bureau thinks these kinds of programs will work in this particular setting, as opposed to this global view on it. But just because something's called something nice doesn't necessarily mean that's what it's delivering on. There are many of these programs where, frankly, if you talk to the partner nation, they would say, I'll give you an example. I was recently in one of the Caribbean nations, and they're very grateful for help with schools, but their number one need is security. They have to build up their police departments and their security assistance. So they would tell you, before we can focus on our educational systems, we want to build capacity in our law enforcement so we can provide security so that then our society can flourish, and that could be possible. That doesn't mean education is not important. It just means that the nation has identified that as a more important need, and we want to have the flexibility to be able to prioritize what could be most helpful.
So that I agree, and we would love to work with you on potential legislation and programming on safety and security. But this legislation, it's not just something that sounds nice and has a pretty title. We worked on this together, the Senate, the House, Republicans, Democrats. It's something that's important and keeps us safe. And that is, statutory. That is something that has been touched. And so I wanted to follow up also in the same vein with international family planning and reproductive health programs. You have also canceled all of these programs. These programs are life-saving. In 2024 alone, they were estimated to save the lives of 34,000 women and girls, prevent over 5 million unsafe abortions, and serve over 47 million women and couples around the world with modern contraceptive care. You are statutorily required to spend $575 million in bilateral international planning awards, as Congress provided in 2024. What is the plan?
There's no plan. As I said, on those programs, with regards to that, there's no plan to spend that money. We're not going to be in that business globally. I mean, we're not going to do it.
So it doesn't matter that Congress passed the law?
Well, the money, that's not, the money that's been appropriated is for that purpose, but the way it's been spent, those programs, the way that money was being spent and the specific uses, we're not going to continue to do it in that same way.
What
is the plan then? I know you talked about reorganization.
Again, all of those funds that will be brought under one of the two buckets, it could, humanitarian assistance, it could be development assistance, it could be refugee and migration assistance. We will work with Congress to find a way to channel those funds in a way that comply with the statute, but at the same time are not funding activities that the administration feels is outside even the purview of the statute.
I just want to say that is statute, that is law, and contrary to your testimony, you are touching and changing it. And you said you wanted to work together with Congress. On April 24th, almost 90 members sent you a letter about these programs requesting a response. We still have not received a response. I respect that you say you want to work with us, but we need more than words. We need actions.
You'll get a response. What day was that letter?
April 24th. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. Chairman Molinar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you again. And it was a privilege to work together with you on issues related to China when you were in the Senate. And I'm excited to do so again in your new capacity, especially as you undertake this much needed reorganization of the department. And following up on your earlier testimony and statement, you rightly identified China and the Chinese Communist Party as a principal threat to the United States. And for decades, as part of its strategy of civil-military fusion, the CCP has stolen intellectual property to stand up its state-owned enterprises and build up its military. It's constantly working to evade export controls to get cutting-edge and legacy chips to leapfrog the U.S. in the AI race and to supply its missile systems. We cannot give the CCP the means to displace the United States. Recently, the Department of Commerce rescinded the overly complex AI diffusion rule, which it intended to cement our lead in AI technology by limiting U.S. chip sales, particularly to countries that may allow Chinese entities access. As Secretary of State, you have a vital role in protecting dual-use technologies from being used by America's adversaries. I wanted to ask you, how do you see the replacement to the diffusion rule taking shape, and what guardrails do you think are needed to prevent China from siphoning more U.S. innovation to build up its military?
Well, as you know, the Commerce Department is undertaking a review of the previous administration's decisions with regards to specific countries and also specific technologies. And so we're providing guidance for them on that regard, or we're providing input. Ultimately, they're the ones that will have to do that. We've heard from a lot of partner nations, some who feel they were unfairly treated in that decision, others who feel we're happy with the outcome. So I know some of those decisions are ongoing, but it's the highest priority. The fact that we have to assume that basically every country or any company that operates in communist China is under the control of the CCP. They can be an independent company. They can argue that they're a corporate entity that's not related to the government. But the truth of the matter is that based on their national security law in China, every company has to do whatever the government tells them to do and turn over any technologies they tell them to turn over. In addition to that, because of the civil-military fusion that exists, virtually any company in China is basically part of their defense industrial complex. They are. And we've seen that repeatedly over and over again. And we've seen advances that the Chinese have made in their own defensive capabilities and offensive capabilities militarily as a result of technology transfers. So it is among the highest of priorities for this administration to protect against that. And frankly, it's also an issue that I raised with every one of my engagement with our partners. It was a big topic of conversation at the recent foreign ministers gathering of NATO last week in Turkey. So a growing number of our allies are also interested in similar moves on their front.
Well, thank you very much for raising that issue, because as you know, the acquiring U.S. technology through third parties is something China is actively trying to do. There are also national security concerns with Chinese nationals coming to the United States to study at our colleges and universities, since the CCP has previously threatened some students' families if they don't spy for them. And there have been instances, including in my home state of Michigan, where Chinese nationals study in the U.S. engaged in trespassing on a military base. What can the State Department do to protect our college campuses and improve the vetting of Chinese nationals who come to the U.S. to study?
I mean, it's not a difficult issue. I mean, it's difficult in the sense that where I think we as a people are generally uncomfortable with saying an entire group of people from one country cannot come. On the other hand, it's hard for us to ignore the repeated and large number of industrial, commercial, and educational research and intellectual property theft being tracked back to primarily graduate students from China. Now, on the one end, you can sort of vet it at the front end, and there are some that have had links prior to their studies in this country to the intelligence services or military services. Those are easy to take out. But the others are more complicated, and that is someone who could be threatened because their family's back home. And in many cases, some of these students do not consider what they're doing to be espionage. They consider it totally sort of acceptable that if you come across a secret or something that's valuable, you would bring it back home to your country. So it's a huge challenge, and it's one that we take very seriously, and it's one that's under consideration now. In fact, there's an interagency conversation happening on different proposals to address it, but it's one I've been raising for years, especially with our institutes of higher education in our country.
Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, welcome, and thank you for being here. Congratulations on your appointments. With great power comes great responsibility. The responsibility to our Constitution, to the American people, and to the truth. You have built a reputation as someone who stood up to dictators, someone who defended our democracy from foreign threats. And I know that firsthand because You, Mr. Secretary, defended me in the past. When President Bukele of El Salvador targeted me, telling his followers, don't vote for Rep. Torres, endorsing my opponent, and unleashing a campaign of vile threats, harassment, intimidation, and leading an online lynching against me 3 times. Your response, Mr. Secretary, was clear and direct. My home was vandalized with gang graffiti. My husband was confronted in our front yard while we were having a toddler swim party. That child is watching us right now. A man filmed himself planning to shoot me. Our Justice Department agreed with us in a 2022 court indictment alleging that Bukele has a deal with MS-13 gang leaders, receiving support from MS-13 and strategizing on how to better hide murderers from the public, disappearing them. In fact, a woman who dared to lead an anti-corruption unit in El Salvador was just arrested by Bukele's attorney general, and no one knows her whereabouts. You understood what was at stake then. You called it out. You stood with me against this outrageous, dangerous authoritarian. I'm a bit confused with what has happened. You're now shaking hands and cutting deals with him. And you facilitated what our Supreme Court has ruled as an illegal rendition, a Maryland father sent to a torture prison in El Salvador. In my hand, I have evidence here, news reports and affidavits that detail the deal you worked on with El Salvador and Bukele's deal with MS-13. I have here interviews with MS-13 gang members revealing the truth behind Bukele's gang ties. And I ask unanimous consent to enter these documents into the record.
Without objection, done.
Congress has been very clear. The law requires you to share these secret agreements. And let me be clear on which agreements I'm talking about. The State Department is usually the lead agency, but at the very least, a part of negotiations with foreign countries, not the Homeland Security, the State Department. The US has an agreement with El Salvador. According to the US law, state must share all international agreements with Congress when requested. And Congress has requested this agreement numerous times. You've so far ignored us. So let me ask you directly, will you commit right now to handing over the requested agreement that the United States has entered into with El Salvador under your watch as required by
Yeah,
law?
I'm not sure what you're referring to. The United States, two things have happened. The first is El Salvador agreed to take back nationals, Salvadorian nationals, including the individual you mentioned. These are people that were in this country unlawfully, had MS-13 ties, and they were repatriated to their country.
Okay,
Then there was a group of gang members from Trinidad Agua in the United States, and he agreed to take them into his prison system. The United States, in addition to that, has provided law enforcement funding to El Salvador, which they are free to use any way they want. They can use it for their jail system. They can use it for other law enforcement
okay,
functions. But that's the deal.
that is not correct.
No, that is correct.
But those agreements did include giving MS-13 gang members to El Salvador at their request, right? We turned over a gang member who committed a murder in the US without allowing for our judicial system to try him, to give some justice to that family of that murdered victim. But we sent him to El Salvador because Bukele requested him, because it is in his best interest to hide his ties with MS-13 gang members. So do the agreements to send migrants to El Salvador contain provisions saying that the US retains any future control over the individuals transferred?
Well, those who Salvadorian citizens are citizens of El Salvador. They're here unlawfully. Gang association is a crime in El Salvador,
We
and he will
send
face justice in his own
Venezuelans,
country.
we send other country nationals to El Salvador. We disappear them to a prison that is known for torture and inhumane dealings with their imprisoned people. How much U.S. taxpayer money did your department send to Bukeles regime?
And Mr.
Well-
Secretary, I would ask you to answer very briefly because we have to move
Yeah,
on.
bottom line is, we gave them law enforcement funding as we do for other countries in Central America, and who we sent to them were trained Agua gang members that Venezuela won't take. So we have to send them somewhere else. We don't want them in our country. We don't want these gangbangers in the United States.
I agree with
Mr.
you on that.
Yeah, Mr. Alford.
Thank you, Chairman Diaz. Thank you, Ranking Member. Secretary Rubio, I want to thank you for your efforts to really refocus, as you've talked about, the State Department and its foreign aid programs, what their core mission should have been all along, should be now going forward, safeguarding U.S. interests abroad as a first line of defense. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. We must see some return to the United States of America on these programs. Foreign aid is not, never should have been a private charity. While we lap the world in humanitarian aid, we have to make sure that these taxpayer funds are spent in accordance with security needs. That's why Chairman Diaz-Balart and Chairman Cole renamed this subcommittee, National Security Department of State and Related Programs, to better reflect what we're doing here. And that's why I would like to propose to you, sir, that we reorganize the best, most impactful foreign aid programs that remain into national security investment projects. Basically, sir, if it doesn't have to do with our national security interests, we shouldn't be spending taxpayer money on it. A lot of those things fall into this bucket, though, sir, of national security investment projects. In Jordan, we were in Jordan last October. I was honored to go with Ms. DeLauro and Chairman Cole on this congressional delegation trip. There's a desalination plant that takes water out of the Red Sea. As you know, we've invested millions of dollars in this, supplies drinking water to Amman, Jordan. That country, as you know, is growing. The parliament is growing number of Muslim Brotherhood members. King Abdullah, we met with him, and he's very concerned about the state of that country. The folks of Amman spend 1/3 of their paycheck on drinking water. And so it's in our national interest, I feel, projects like these to go forward. So these friends of ours that we rely on, and they rely on us, can have great relationships. But as you know, this whole program's gotten screwed up. We spent $50,000 in taxpayers' money to fund transgender opera in Colombia, $2 million for sex changes and LGBTQ activism in Guatemala, $70,000 for a DI musical in Ireland. Mr. Secretary, we're getting a handle on how this all happened, okay? I'm still trying to get my head wrapped around this. How did we get this screwed up with these programs? How do we keep it from happening again, sir?
Well, I think that's precisely the point of these reforms. Someone has to speak up and say they own these projects or they think it's going to make a difference. You highlighted a few. I just looking here on my papers because I wanted to read you a few from the, the greatest hits
Please do.
of some of the programs that we've identified that, I mean, look, this is not fully representative of every, but, $10 million for voluntary medical male circumcision in Mozambique, $227,000 for Big Cat's YouTube channel. I don't know what that is, but $20 million for fiscal federalism in Nepal, $1.5 million for voter confidence in Liberia, $14 million for social cohesion in Mali. The list goes on and on. I mean, there's more here, but the point being is that some of these programs, look, there are programs that are really good in our national interest. You spoke about the desalination programs in Jordan. We brought most of those back right away. They actually were part of the initial carve-out that was an error made. Those were added in, and the remaining 2 programs are coming online. There are programs that are not bad, but are not necessarily core to our national interest. And then there are some that were just absurd and ridiculous, and nobody owned them, and no one could raise their hand and say, that's my program, this is why I think it's important. And in many cases, we're coming at the expense of something else that could have been spent on. That's what we're trying to avoid, and that's why driving these decisions and this ownership of what we fund down to the front lines at our embassies and regional bureaus is so critical to preventing this from happening again.
Since its inception in the 1980s under President Bush, PEPFAR has saved more than 25 million lives. This is a program that is critical, but it was never meant to be a permanent program. How do we work to ensure, and I've got a plan to curtail this U.S. spending over a period of years, not to just cut it off entirely, but to turn it over to secular entities rather than being taxpayer funded through these programs. We've got to keep this program going until it can gain other legs from other sources. What is your thought on that?
Well, 85% of beneficiaries under PEPFAR are back on and have been. So that's a good news. You're right about the program. And that is that ideally foreign aid and development programs are programs that end, and they end because they achieve their goal. And the goal here is to either end the transmission of the disease, which is critical, and also to improve our partner capacity, basically the nation state's ability to deal with it themselves. What cannot be the foreign policy of the United States is that we are, for an undefined period of time or in perpetuity, we're going to fund every great cause on the planet. We just can't do it. We can't afford it. And we're not going to continue to do that. We can't continue to approach foreign aid in that way.
Thank you, sir. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Quigley, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I appreciate your comments last week. You said the U.S. is troubled by the humanitarian situation in Gaza, echoing in some respects the words of our new Pope, Pope Leo, that it is calling the situation in the Palestinian enclave yet more worrying and saddening. Quote, I renew my fervent appeal to allow for the entry of fair humanitarian help and to bring the aid to the hostilities, the devastating price which is paid by children, the elderly, and the sick. I know your heart's in the right place on that. And you stated that the engagement from the U.S. and other countries, Israel has started to allow that aid to re-enter. We were talking about 100 trucks, we're hearing reports entering yesterday, far fewer than the 600 during the ceasefire per day, but that the aid is still not, even from that 100 trucks, is still not getting through to the Palestinians. What further diplomatic efforts are we going to do? And what are the benchmarks? What are we telling Israel that has to happen? And what are we saying the consequences are, if any, if it doesn't happen?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's a very serious and important question, and I want to answer it here. And I'm not trying to filibuster, but you deserve the answer to it. Obviously, Israel is a key ally of the United States, and so we are always careful about what we say publicly about the nature of our conversations with them. But I think they've acknowledged in their own statement that due to the intervention of the United States and others is the reason why they've started to allow aid, albeit, as you've pointed out, not at the levels that are necessary. I can tell you I was in Rome this weekend was it Saturday, and I met with Cindy McCain at the World Food Program just to get a better understanding of the systems they have set up for distribution, and whether they would, what amount of aid is ready to move in. And we've been engaged constantly. Obviously, I've been on the Hill all day, but I know members of our team, and this includes Mr. Witkoff, our special envoy and ambassador on the topic, has been working on that as well to ensure that additional aid is provided to people there. Because as we said, we were concerned about the conditions and the directions that they were headed. I think ultimately we would like to see is for this to end, for all the hostages to come home, all of them, including those who are deceased, but their families deserve to have that closure. And we're committed to that as well. And I've said this a number of times in the past, so I don't want to get over my ahead of myself or over my skis, but I have some level of optimism that we may have breakthrough achievements here pretty quickly, hopefully, on an end to this and the release of all the hostages. Again, I have felt that way now at least 4 separate times in the last couple of months. And for one reason or another, at the last minute, it didn't happen. And so I don't want to be disappointed on it again, but I want you to know there are efforts ongoing to both provide more humanitarian assistance and bring about the end of this to this conflict as it's ongoing. Because frankly, you can't begin to provide the lives that the people who live there deserve, free of Hamas, until that ends.
And agreed as to the issue with hostages, and that Israel has every right to defend itself, but the manner in which they conduct the war has consequences as well for the safety of Israel in the meantime. So beyond just the talk and the diplomatic efforts, and I know you don't want to reveal negotiations, but there has to be at least some framework of benchmarks in which we're talking to the Israelis about what at the bare minimum has to happen on the humanitarian side with at least some repercussions. And we hear from our allies who are talking about sanctions, but at the very least, we have to have some sense that the U.S. is in this beyond just, please, would you do this because it's the right thing to do?
Well, I would say that our conversations are more substantive than just please do this, because it's a nice thing to do, obviously. Again, Israel, we support 100% their right, not just to defend themselves, but to protect themselves from Hamas. To frankly, we can't have a future for the people of Gaza. There can't be a future that's prosperous and safe as long as Hamas or any group like Hamas is governing it. And there's a lot of work to be done post-conflict in that regard. But in the interim period, the one thing we made abundantly clear is that the humanitarian situation And I think this was acknowledged by the Prime Minister in his statement. The humanitarian situation and the direction that it was headed was undermining Israel's standing in national security. And so we've had these conversations in a frank manner. I don't want to characterize them or go further because, again, they're an important ally. And I also don't want to imperil the work that's being done, both to bring a permanent end to that conflict, but also to get the aid in an increased and timely manner.
It's in both countries' interests. It's in the Palestinian and Israelis' interest that there is a long-term agreement that allows both to exist peacefully with some security assurances for both.
Thank you, Mr. Quigley. Ms. Letlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Rubio, for being with us today. And I wanted to start with a topic that is very important to me personally, but also to my constituents. And we've been battling it at a national level, but unfortunately, it's a worldwide issue, and that's human trafficking. It remains an urgent and devastating human rights issue worldwide. It disproportionately targets women and children, trapping them in cycles of forced labor, sexual exploitation, and modern-day slavery. Combating this crisis requires sustained commitment to prevention, prosecution, and survivor support. An anti-human trafficking group recently shared with me that although this takes place overseas, it has a direct impact on our own citizens. I've learned that human traffickers have forced victims to work in scam call centers, where they are made to target vulnerable Americans, particularly the elderly, with the intent to steal money and commit identity theft. Secretary Rubio, what strategies is the department employing to ensure that anti-trafficking efforts remain effective and targeted, particularly in high-risk regions where women and children are most vulnerable? And what steps is the department taking to strengthen international cooperations and enforcement mechanisms to disrupt and expose trafficking networks and safeguard survivors?
Yeah, thank you for the question. First of all, that's one of the reasons why we preserved and actually advanced one of the bureaus under the Office of Coordinator for Foreign Assistance and Humanitarian Affairs. We have a new division, or not a new division, but moved under that branch of population, refugee, and migration. And the key is we're not in the business. In many cases, some of these programs in the past were about, frankly, accelerating migration, helping people along the migratory path as they came towards the United States. And we want to prevent mass migration because mass migration lends itself to human trafficking. I would argue in many cases, mass migration frankly is human trafficking because you are getting people, you are charging them money, promising to bring them to the border of the United States, and then committing horrifying atrocities along the way, including in many cases, handing those people over at the border to traffickers inside our own country who then tell them they have to pay off their debt by working for them. And this was happening, and it was happening on a consistent and horrifying basis. There's nothing humanitarian, there's nothing compassionate about mass migration. The only people who benefit from mass migration are the traffickers. And so that is one of the things that we want to be able to prevent. I think you also see, obviously, the opportunity to disrupt it at the ground level. I'm very concerned about Haiti, a country that we have seen a long history of not just the abduction of children and young girls, but of people writ large into trafficking networks. And so that's what instability creates in places like that. And I think all of our missions around the world already have a mandate, but we'll have an increased mandate in our view, not just to prevent mass migration, but to identify networks that are preying on vulnerable individuals for purposes of human trafficking. And I would say that there are many countries around the world that have a willingness to tackle it, but don't have the capacity.
Right.
And then there are other countries, frankly, who look the other way, because it's an industry or it's run by people who have ties to the government, and that needs to be called out as well.
Thank you so much. My constituents will appreciate that response. I appreciate the administration's continued commitment to protect life and ensuring that U.S. taxpayer dollars are used responsibly. I also understand the desire to refocus State Department funding towards core priorities like safeguarding our own national security by addressing the spread of infectious diseases abroad that could impact the U.S. and its citizens. As the budget priorities evolve, it may be worth considering how the U.S. health investments align with the broader objective of supporting effective programs that address preventable infectious diseases, improve health outcomes, and save lives, and reduce long-term dependence on external assistance. Programs such as Gavi and PEPFAR, which you discussed earlier, have contributed to these types of goals. Secretary Rubio, with the adjustments in the proposed budget, how is the department planning to reorganize or reprioritize its health resources in a way that reflects the original intent behind these initiatives?
Yes, well, I mentioned on the question of PEPFAR already, where we have preserved it. 85% of recipients are now receiving PEPFAR services, and we want to build on the program and improve it because it's one that has strong bipartisan commitment, has been successful, but it needs to be measured not just by how much money we spend, but by the success of empowering local government, the host governments to eventually build their capacity and graduate from the program. In the case of vaccines, we continue to provide vaccine services. What we have problems with is a number of these international organizations like Gavi and others and the way they've conducted themselves. I would extend to that the way the World Health Organization behaved during the pandemic, where frankly, I think they did not just a poor job, but an outrageous job of covering up for China and the irresponsibility on the Chinese end when that started. So we are looking actively at alternatives to multinational organizations like Gavi to provide the same service, but in a better way, in a way that actually ensures our purpose, which is to prevent disease and instability in other countries.
That's encouraging news. Thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Subcommittee, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Secretary Rubio, for being here. And thank you for your words, especially at the beginning when you're describing and through the questions on your fast and I would say intentional actions in restructuring, refocusing the department and its true mission of expanding American interests around the world. I think that is exactly what we should have been doing for a long time. And you're definitely getting there very, very quickly. I'll start off with this. I represent Arizona's 6th congressional district, which is along the U.S.-Mexico border. First, I'd like to state how impressed I am with how fast the administration has been able to combat the transnational criminal organizations and secure our southern border. However, low border encounters by CBP, our fentanyl crisis continues to ravish many of our communities across the country still. How is your budget request going to prioritize programs for counter-drug initiatives and border security, particularly with relation to fentanyl?
Well, we've remained very committed, especially, we've preserved the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement at the Assistant Secretary level. That's underneath the broader new directory that we built on the Undersecretary for International Security. And it's a top priority for many of our partners. I can give you a few examples of places where we think we can make a difference. First, let me say, in full concession, the Mexican government has been probably more cooperative and forward-leaning than at any time that I can recall in my 15 years here for a couple of reasons. But one, because I think they too identify the cartels as a threat to their government and their national stability. There are parts of Mexico today that are governed by drug cartels, and they recognize the threat that it poses. But I think it's also, and by the way, if you go all down Central America, country after country, the primary threat they face in Ecuador, in Costa Rica, in Panama to some extent, certainly in Guatemala, is the threat of these transnational organizations that use their countries as transfer routes and which we seek to help them develop the capability to partner with us and disrupt, and that'll be a priority. In the Caribbean basin, that's also been an issue of grave concern. But primarily what we hear there, one of the things we're working on now with the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, the ATF, is how can we disrupt the flow of illegal gun shipments, primarily leaving the Miami River in containers, embedded among other things, that's finding its way into the hands of Haitian gangs, gangs in Trinidad, gangs in Jamaica. That's also destabilizing the region and those countries. And what they want, if you talk to our embassies and you talk to those governments, is for us to help them build the law enforcement capacities so that it's foreign aid that ends, because one day they will have the capacity to disrupt it. The Dominican Republic is currently seeking radar systems to be able to detect boats and planes that may be coming to their shores, because they become a very attractive place to bring drugs through, because it quickly can from there be shipped into Puerto Rico, and at that point has entered the U.S. and crossed our border. So I think this is an example of where embassy and regional-based policymaking will help us to identify the critical capacity needs that each individual country gets, and then drive our assistance based on what they need, as opposed to what we think they need.
That's great to hear, especially on the, and I agree with you on the, we've talked to Coast Guard about that, about the interdictions also of drugs across the ocean. And what you mentioned about the Mexican government, I agree with you. I've worked on that issue for a while, and I've seen a very open willingness from them. I think it's a win-win for both countries to be able to tackle that. In the little time that I have left, and you already covered some of this, I was going to bring up also the situation with the hostages and the interactions with Hamas there, and the hostages remaining, especially the 4 Americans. Israel has successfully destroyed much of Hamas terror capabilities, but the group is not yet defeated, and all hostages are not free. You talked a bit about that, so I'll focus my question really on UNRWA. And does the administration support the continued prohibition on funding of UNRWA? And is the administration working with others in the international community to design an alternative to UNRWA as well that meets the needs of all Palestinians without perpetuating the conflict?
We do oppose working with UNRWA. And in fact, that's exactly what we're working on, is finding alternative mechanisms to deliver aid that doesn't find its way into the hands of Hamas, where they steal it and in some cases resell it at exorbitant prices to people that are hungry and suffering. And in many ways is the grip they had. On the population there as well. One of the things they use to be able to control population is their ability to steal this. And in some cases, they weren't stealing it. They had people inside the organizations that were cooperating with them. We do need to find alternative mechanisms. And there are some that exist that are independent of UNRWA that are out there. And so like I said, we've put out some proposals. We're open to any proposals that exist that provide assistance and aid, especially if we can get to a peacetime posture to help rebuild that does not help a group like Hamas benefit or restart and grow again.
You're right on that. Over $1 billion stolen in the last 18 months on that. So I'm glad you're on it, and I trust you. We're going to get that done. So thank you, sir, for your time today, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Subcommittee. Folks, members, the Secretary has agreed to we'll do another round. We're going to have to stick everybody to 3 minutes. I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive in keeping people to 3 minutes. So thank you all very much for your cooperation. Mr. Secretary, I will start. I mentioned in my opening remarks that you've hit you've hit the ground running in a serious way, in a successful way. The Latin American policies of the last 4 years under President Biden did tremendous damage, I think, to the U.S. security interests and to the region. The previous administration cozied up to anti-American dictators and tended to pressure our allies. So let me, if you could, in broad strokes, how does the Trump administration approach to Latin America differ from the previous administration? Specifically when we're dealing with rewarding our democratic partners, our allies, countering the PRC and anti-American regimes, and making sure, and something that we've talked a little bit about already together, all of us have, ensuring that U.S. assistance actually advances our core national security interests.
Well, I mean, it first starts by characterizing, we have 3 kinds of countries in the Western Hemisphere. We have democracies that have elected leaders that are friendly to the United States and want to be friends with us and ally with us. And we need to make sure there's benefits to being an ally of the United States. I tell people in foreign relations, your counterpart, whether they're elected or they're not, are politicians. They're in politics too. They have domestic audiences and domestic constituencies. They have to be able to go back and show people that being a friend of the United States is beneficial. And this is one of the things that maybe it's aid, sometimes it's trade or commercial relations and the like. There's a second group that is, democratically elected, but not so friendly. We're not seeking to get into conflicts with them per se, but obviously we can't treat them the same as we treat those who are friendly to us. There's benefits to being our friend. And frankly, I mean, maybe not as many benefits to not being our friend, but again, that's our national interest. And then there's a third group that are autocracies, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba. That we just simply can't ignore that what's happening there, because in addition to the fact of lack of democracy and the like, they are sources of grave instability. 12% of the Cuban population has abandoned the country in the last year and a half. 8 million Venezuelans have abandoned that country over the last decade, one of the largest migrations in all of human history. And in addition, destabilizing Colombia and other countries in the region. In fact, Venezuela allows a narco-terrorist group to operate within their territory with impunity, constantly threatening the Colombian state.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Again, leading by example, I'm going to go to the ranking member with still almost half a minute left.
All right, well, I'll use your first half minute.
Not part of the deal, but good shot. All right, Ms. Frank.
I just want to remind the chairman that our president is trying to accept a $400 million plane from a country that funds Hamas. Okay. With that said, this has been a bad day for the women. You've already nixed education and birth control. I do want to ask you about women, peace, and security. That's an act that President Trump signed into law. You were a co-sponsor. Also, the WE Act, which is an economic empowerment act that was actually championed by Ivanka Trump. And it's rooted in a recognition that the WPS, the participation is essential to have women in peace talks for stability. And that's because women bear the brunt of war in so many different ways from men. Not that men are not affected by war, but we're talking about sexual violence, trafficking, widowed, forced to become breadwinners and taking over new responsibilities, the becoming refugees. And so when it comes to trying to figure out what to do, it's very important to have women at the table. The office, the secretary's office have had what's called the Office of Global Women's Issues in order to implement this law. What worries me right now is, although it looks like your intentions are to scatter this program, but not have a central office with you that's going to oversee this. I think that would be a mistake. And I want to just ask you if you could, if we can discuss that, because I got to tell you, I've spent a lot of time on this issue, and I think it's very, very important that you do not dismantle that particular
Yeah,
office.
no, and I will engage with you. I know it's important, and I share your commitment on it because I sponsored that and supported that bill as well. So I think the question real is, do we need to have a bureau that's all it does from a global perspective, or is that a function that we should insist each of our regional bureaus prioritize and have someone assigned to working that? Because I do think that while the challenges women face are global, they are different in different parts of the world and in different regions. I assure you, the challenges being faced in the European continent, women are very different than the challenges that they probably face in the Indo-Pacific and or in the African continent or somewhere else. And so I think that what I'm trying to paraphrase what you're saying is you want to make sure that the issue doesn't lose focus because it no longer has a centralized office. I hope I can convince you by interacting with you that we can stay committed to the goal, but do so at the regional, making it a regional priority as opposed to a one size
Okay, well, I hope we can agree to this, because I don't want you to lose your staff, and I don't want you to lose your staff on all these programs until we can together work and see what's best moving our country forward. And with that, I'm just going to put some letters into the record, Mr. Chair. We have a bunch of questions for you. I know you've been traveling. I hope you can get to them, and if I could put them.
Absolutely, without objection.
And thank you.
Thank the
We look
ranking member.
forward
and
to
thank-
working
and
with
Thank
you.
you for sticking to the clock. Mr. Subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I'll continue the same line of questions in the conversation we were having just a minute ago. Since 2005, the United States has funded an effort to train Palestinian security forces and help coordinate security between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. The mission, led by an American general, has received bipartisan support over the years, helping to support critical security cooperation between Palestinian and Israeli security forces. What are the current plans for the continuation of this function in the region? And what funding do you anticipate for FY26?
The function will continue. I think what's being contemplated is whether the function should be brought under the auspices of the embassy and the ambassador. That's really the internal conversation that we're having right now. And I tend to believe that it should, because I think it needs to be part of our coordinated response to the challenges that in Israel in particular. So I think that's really, but the function will continue. The question is it under the authority of the ambassador?
Yeah, and I again agree with your streamlining of these services and these and the mission that we have in order to reach that objective. On that vein as well, one consistent frustration we had with USAID under the previous administration was a lack of information and data shared with Congress on the impact of the programs paid with taxpayer dollars. I believe that any U.S. taxpayer dollar that leaves the country must be working in our national security interest and have strict accountability metrics to be measured and see what's working and what's not, as you previously mentioned. If you can elaborate on this a little bit, you kind of touched on it, but how will you ensure the consistent and open communication between the State Department and this subcommittee going forward? And part of that, and how you're planning on repositioning our aid towards prioritizing national security?
Well, a couple, I think, will be very helpful. And I used to, when people used to tell me this when I was in the Senate, I didn't fully appreciate it. Now I really appreciate this idea that we do need to get more of our Senate confirmed people on board. We're starting to get some of them, but if we can really start to get our undersecretaries in place that oversee some of these bureaus, we have good people functioning there now. Many of them are career Foreign Service officers who are acting as the chief bureau officer for the time being. But it is helpful to have someone there that you brought in for that specific purpose. And in fact, many of these senior bureau officers are welcoming of that. So I maybe did not fully appreciate it while I was in the Senate and we were slowing up some of these nominations in the past, how critical, not me, I wasn't a big holder of nominations, but others were, how critical having some of these Senate confirmed positions are. We're making good progress on it now, but I think, I don't know, we're 18 weeks into the job. I believe I have 4 or 5 in the building currently, and I don't think any of our undersecretaries are in yet. So we're anxiously awaiting them, and that will really help us improve everything from legislative relations to, to actually answering your questions on the national security component of it. Everything we do is driven by the national security because the national security is at the core of our national interests. The most important thing the federal government does is keep America safe. Without safety, you can't have prosperity. So it's the most important thing we do, and all of our foreign policy should be geared first and foremost on what keeps America safe.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I yield back.
Mr. Laura.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a note, it would appear that in terms of the estimate is, in terms of money that has been impounded, or if you will, stolen, as is congressionally directed money, it's about $40 billion in development and humanitarian funds. This is from State Department, USAID, this money not being spent. Secretary, we need to have an accounting of what those, what has been cut, what has been terminated, and what may be being restored. We asked Mr. Morocco several weeks ago to let us know about what was cut, what were the criteria for making the cuts, and to date, this is again several weeks ago, we have not heard one word. So this committee would like to know that before dealing with an appropriations bill. Mr. Secretary, warehouses full of food rations that could feed millions, including the entire population of Gaza for a month and a half, are rotting in warehouses because of this administration's decision to gut U.S. foreign aid structure. Some of the food supply will be incinerated, will expire as soon as July, while children across the world are starving. The administration's haphazard cancellation of contracts and freezing of funds have stopped food aid from getting to the most vulnerable people. World Food Program Director Cindy McCain called me. They ran out of food at WFP, and the Israelis would not open the gates, so the food is there rotting. This food is grown by U.S. producers, paid for by American taxpayers, and really, I don't know how the administration justifies allowing this food to rot while civilians are starving. Can you commit to us to ensuring that food aid will not go to waste in warehouses and will instead be distributed to people in need as directed by the Congress? Will you ensure this food aid moves as quickly as possible to its intended destinations?
Well, you just outlined, the answer is yes, because you just highlighted the impediment was not us. We're not telling them they can't distribute the food. The impediment you pointed out that Cindy McCain told you about was that some government was standing in the way. And that's been part of the conversations that I was speaking about with Mr. Quigley
With
a moment
Mr.
ago.
Quigley, you were doing that, but that really gets to the question of how strong the U.S. is going to be in leading the humanitarian assistance that needs to get into Gaza and some of these other places. That is a leadership role. That is a role for the Secretary of State, and is a role for this administration. And with regard to UNRWA, 1949 set up to be there for dealing to the Palestinians, only meant to be temporary. It has been the major source of distribution of food, and also with education and healthcare services. I would like to ask you, tell us your alternatives. To date, we have not had any alternatives.
Well, we would love to find an alternative. We need to find an alternative. We're actively looking, if not to build an alternative with our regional partners, but it's not going to be a group that's controlled by Hamas and has a bunch of Hamas
Well, the fact of the matter is, Qatar is controlled by,
Right.
Qatar
We have to-
deals with Hamas.
Folks, thank you, Mr. Laura. Look, we have a hard shutdown at 4:00. And so what I would like, if that's possible, is if folks can limit them, because otherwise the folks at the end of this are not going to get time. So let me go to Mr. Molinar. Mr. Molinar, if you can limit it to really quickly, you're
One
doing a
question.
favor to everybody.
Mr. Secretary, this month, the CCP implemented new laws severely curtailing religious liberty in its campaign to control religion and people of faith in China, including foreign missionaries. What can the administration do to raise this issue, to ensure that it's clear to the CCP that religious freedom is an inalienable human right and that no one in China should be persecuted for their
Yeah, obviously, in the case of China, we have very little influence over their internal politics. It's a repressive communist regime and, the second largest economy in the world. and a powerful government, unfortunately. If you think, but it would be the top priority of our religious freedom Undersecretary and our Assistant Secretary, and all the efforts that we place is calling out anywhere in the world where religious freedom is under duress, particularly in places like this. I'm well aware of the challenges of religious minorities. In fact, the Chinese Communist Party is unfriendly to anything, religion or otherwise, that challenges the authority of the Communist Party. But we'll continue to be a strong voice on their behalf, nonetheless, in the hopes that global pressure and attention, as we've done it to some extent with the Uyghur situation that a lot of people weren't even talking about many years ago, and now it's become globalized, people's awareness of it, although the atrocities there continue as well.
Thank you. I yield back.
Chairman, leading by example. Ms. Meng, thank you.
Mr. Secretary, as a mom, I'm really troubled by the way that the department has treated public servants, USAID's public servants who dedicated their lives to this country, including some who are my own constituents from Queens. One example, in February, a USAID Foreign Service officer who was overseas needed a medevac for his pregnant wife who was at risk of hemorrhaging due to a life-threatening condition. She was 31 weeks pregnant after having spent tens of thousands of dollars on fertility treatments. Her medevac request was denied twice. The response was there's no USAID funding for medevacs, and it took intervention from a senator to finally get her the care she needed. Should we be abandoning our dedicated public servants this way? And was there a plan in place to ensure the health and safety of our own public servants and make sure that it wasn't compromised?
Yeah, that was a media account of that. That was inaccurate. That's not accurate. The medevac has been provided to anyone who needed one, including in that particular case. The problem is the medevac under the State Department mandates, and the State Department mandates are we medevac you to the nearest available facility that can treat your medical emergency, not one you choose. So I'd rather go here than there. But that one was not had nothing to do with funding. The medevac was available. They wanted to go to a different site than the one that was that the policies allowed them to go to.
Okay, and just a quick follow-up. Earlier today, you told HVAC that no one has died because of the actions to destroy USAID. Do you stand behind that testimony? And has there been any assessment conducted by the department to this point of how many people have died?
I think that question about people dying around the world is unfair one. First of all, the United States is the largest humanitarian provider on the planet. I would argue how many people have died because China hasn't done it? How many people have died because the UK has cut back on spending, and so has other countries, France, Canada. They've cut back on humanitarian spending. So the United States continues to provide more than anybody else by far. We feed more people than anyone on this planet does in humanitarian assistance by far.
Sorry, I'm running out of time and I want to make sure my colleagues have time. But these, just so you know, they were programs and commitments and contracts made statutorily promised to the people around the world, and to withdraw them in a very sudden, impatient, and irresponsible way may have led people to die. And I would love to have more transparency in the future. We could work together. Thank you.
Mr. Alford?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Secretary, these are the programs that are being cut in the USAID program. These are the ones that we are retaining. There are 5 columns on these sheets. I've reviewed a lot of these. I'm trying to make heads or tails of why these programs are being eliminated. I know that we're refocusing. That is great. National Security Investment Projects. I'm with you on that. There are 5 columns: contract number, vendor name, contract title, description, estimated life contract value, and obligations to date. Would it be possible to go through here and add a 6th column to let us know as a committee why programs are being terminated and why specifically some programs are being retained?
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, programs are being canceled simply because we just don't view why that's in the national interest. Why are we funding some cultural program in some part of the world? We just don't think that's a core mission of the United States. So, I mean, we could elaborate more in a 6th column in that regard. Some of them we're not claiming fraud. We're just saying we shouldn't be spending money on that. I mean, I was reading the list here a moment ago. I probably put it away, but there are a bunch of programs here that I would ask myself, I mean, do we really need to spend? I'll give you one example here. Do we need $7 million for the American Bar Association to promote the resilience of the Eurasian legal sector and civic society?
Sir,
I would say I don't know why that's in our national interest. I can put a column that
I'm in total agreement with you. We want to work with you. We want to fund the programs that need to be funded. We want to fund the State Department. We want to help you, but we need help from you. Would you commit to having your senior official staff spend some time with us and our staff and our committee staff going through these spreadsheets so that we can more in detail understand where you're coming from?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you.
Mr. Otis, you're the one between the
Yes,
secretary and the last one, but you're always quick, so go ahead.
I don't want to hold you back, Mr. Secretary. Can you tell me how much money have you given to the Bukele regime?
Well, it's not a regime. He got elected by an enormous majority.
Well, the second, his reelection was actually an illegal reelection. Remember that he took over Congress, and then by bringing the military and fired all of the entire judiciary.
Yeah, they still had an election. He won by, I don't know what the margins were, but they were extraordinary. I just don't think it's fair to call him a regime. I know you don't like him and you have
That's
reasons
fine.
not to like him, but I
How
don't think
much
it's
money?
fair to say they're a regime. A regime is in Venezuela. This guy had a real election.
How much money, sir?
Well, I have to give you the number, but I think it's 1.4 million or let me not I have the exact number. I don't have it in front of me, but
Okay.
it was law enforcement funds provided to them as we do other countries under that program. It had not, you know,
Senator
they
Murray
could use it for any
yesterday said
purpose
it
they
was
want.
$15 million. Are you saying that that amount is incorrect?
That amount sounds incorrect to me, but
Okay.
I'll get you the exact number because
Thank
I
you.
owe you that much.
And are we doing a second round to give him more money?
Other than maybe, no, I don't believe that there's a second round per se. Well, there might be because these are 2024 dollars.
I love
it's possible they're
continue this
eligible for
conversation
$25.
with you at another time, maybe in a private setting, so that we could really talk about.
Yeah,
in
but
more
these are
detail.
law enforcement funds, so they could receive under 2025. I can't say they won't. Obviously,
Well,
we're working through that process.
The Leahy law prohibits, sending money to a country that terrorizes people and punishes them without due process.
Yeah, that's not our assessment of what's happening there. Our assessment is that he's cleaned up the country and gotten rid of gangs. That was a country you couldn't even walk in the
By
streets 4
disappearing
years ago.
people.
No, they're not disappeared. They're in the jail.
Okay, I yield back.
Just in terms of Ukraine, my concern is that when you equate these two powers at the negotiating table, it does seem to diminish the fact that Russia was the aggressor and having been there 5 times since the war started, stood at Bucha at the mass grave and heard accounts of rape and murder and the kidnapping of kids. I just don't hear the administration talking about holding Putin accountable for these things as part of these discussions. And finally recognizing that Putin doesn't seem to have any reason to negotiate in good faith because he has 4 to 6 times the manpower. He treats his troops like cannon fodder. And I think he probably recognized this is an administration that will do another supplemental. So what in the world are we doing to hold him accountable and to actually force him into negotiating in good faith? And again, not rewarding him with de facto land that he currently occupies. And what is it? We're punishing him that he can't have additional land. So what is it we are doing to actually hold him accountable and force him to negotiate in good faith beyond really stern tweets?
Yeah, on the second point, those are the details that would have to be worked out in any negotiation. And as I said, he'll have to make concessions and so will the Ukrainian side. I don't know what those are. We're not going to predetermine what those are. That's why we wanted to enter into direct negotiations. We honestly continue to believe we're open to any peace deal, but we think it's very difficult to enter peace negotiations without a ceasefire because something blows up somewhere, some attack happens in the interim and the negotiations fall apart. On your first question, listen, I sense, and I think we all do, what you're arguing here, okay, about the imbalance in the relationship, by who's the invasion, things of that nature. But the bottom line is this war has been going on for 3 years and there was no end in sight. And the only way you can end it is you got to be able to bring both sides to the table. And we feel like the president, we know the president was in a unique position to be able to bring both sides to a table and be able to talk to both sides. It may ultimately not work out. It may ultimately not work out, but we have to at least try to make it work. And I think it's the same position, for example, the Vatican has adopted. There's a lot of pressure on the Vatican to condemn the Russians but the way the Vatican has viewed it is unless we're able to talk to both sides, we have no hope whatsoever of trying to force a
But if
negotiation.
there's no impetus on Putin to do anything, he won't do anything and he will be rewarded. This is more like Chamberlain than someone who's trying to win a Nobel Peace Prize. Chamberlain didn't win a Nobel Peace Prize conceding this and saying, well, this war could be going on for a long time. FDR didn't say this war has been going on a long time. You know, we're not going to engage and involve. We're just going to see if both sides can work this out. Aggressors like a tyrant like Putin aren't going to listen to goodwill.
Well, I understand. I think the goal here is to reach a ceasefire so they can negotiate a broader deal that's fair and frankly sustainable. If it's an unsustainable peace, meaning if it's an unfair, unbalanced peace, it won't be sustainable. And our goal is to get them to that point. I hope we're successful because the alternative is more people will die.
I agree.
Much for your time and your service. This concludes today's hearing. The Subcommittee on National Security, Department of State, and Related Programs stands adjourned.